topic of deploying your Java web application to the internet using a free account. Now the details of this are going to vary depending upon which account provider, whether it's free or paid, you decide to go with. And for example, there is, if you go to Google, let's say, and you search for Google App Engine, you can find here the Google App Engine will let you, there's actually a plugin for Eclipse that you can install, and it gets you a button like this, and you can create a new Google App Engine project, which is basically a Servlet and JSP project using some custom Google stuff, and you can deploy it using this button, and Google has its own system for letting you do that. But we're going to take a look at this in this tutorial at a account provider that lets you deploy your project for free using, and it can just be a normal standard project with no kind of Google stuff involved in it. And I'm sure there are lots of these providers if you search around. You just need someone that basically gives you a Java application server that you can use. But the one that I like to use at the moment is called CloudBees. And as I say, if CloudBees is not around anymore by the time you look at this tutorial, then just do a few searches for a Java application server, and I'm sure you'll find some good ones. But I've got an account with CloudBees that I set up for free, and I'm going to just log in here. And CloudBees lets you have, you can deploy your applications free, and you can also have like MySQL databases of up to 5 megabytes for free as well. And it deploys your applications in a cloud, so that providing you're willing to pay, even if you get millions of users, you can scale up your applications very well. And it's also just great for testing and stuff, and it's nice to see your stuff running on the URL. So I'm going to log in here. My email here is my personal email, and if you want to email me, send me a line please at john@kevopprogramming.com, and I'm going to just type in my password here, so I think that's right, and click login. Now this interface, when you first see it, looks a little bit intimidating, but it's actually pretty damn simple. And if you want to create a database, for example, which we'll actually look at in a future tutorial, you just click databases. But what we want to deploy here is an application, so I'm going to click applications, and when the page loads, now I want to create a new application, so I'll just go to here and add a new application. This is pretty simple actually, and you can see here that it's giving me the option to create a JVM web application in the WAR format, and in the last tutorial we saw how to create a WAR file, and we're going to be using that again in this tutorial with a few little twists. So let's give this a name, and I'll just call it deployment test, and click finish. And you just have to wait for a few seconds while it sets up your application in this cloud, a cloud being like a whole load of different machines that all work together. And let's click configure now. And now on this page I've got some useful information, including some ways you can deploy your application even more quickly on the command line, which I've never actually tried, but you've got instructions here. But what I want to do is upload a WAR file. Now the catch here is, well, there are two little catches that I should mention. One is that you need to make sure, at least at the time that I'm making this tutorial, that your application has one of these standard web.xml files in it, in its webinf directory under web content. And we looked at web.xml files a couple of tutorials ago, and if your application doesn't have one, then please go back and check the tutorial on web.xml files, because you will need one to deploy your application successfully, at least at the moment, as far as I know. And another little quirk here, another thing to be aware of, is that you need to compile your application using the same Java JDK that you're going to deploy with, that your application server is running. And actually at the moment, and this may have changed by the time you look at these tutorials, so it's worth looking at the documentation for your application server. But at the moment, I believe this version of CloudBees is running Java 6, and I compiled with Java 7. So I've installed a Java 6 JDK on my machine along with the JDK 7, and I'm going to right click my project here and go to Properties, and I'm going to go to Java Compiler, and I'm just going to change this to 1.6. Java has this weird thing that version 6 is referred to as 1.6 and version 5 as 1.5 and so on. I'm not completely sure why, but there you go. So I'm going to compile this with Java version 6, and I'll just click Apply and build the project now. Okay, and if you want to be doubly sure, maybe it's worth just going to Project Clean, and that will get rid of any of your compiled files, and then just running it again to check that it works. Let's select a servlet or a JSP and click Run. And when you do this, you might see an error icon there, but it's oh yeah, my Tomcat's already running actually. So I'm going to stop Tomcat before I test this. So let's just go to, I'll search in my start menu for Monitor Tomcat and right click Run as Administrator, and we saw this in the last tutorial as well. And I'm just going to stop Tomcat. So if you see that message, ports required by Tomcat are already in use, it's probably because you've already got an instance of Tomcat running, and you need to stop that before you can deploy using the Eclipse version. So let's try to run this again, and if you see an error icon there when you change the Java version, don't worry too much, because the acid test is, does your application work? And Eclipse sometimes gets a little bit confused and says there's an error where there isn't one. And now I'm going to just go to File, Export, and actually not File Export, I'm going to right click my project, sorry, and I'm going to go to Export. So right click the project, go to Export, select WAR file, and I'm going to select a folder to put that in. I'll put it in C workspace, which is where I've got my projects, my Eclipse projects, and I'll click Save. And I don't want to optimize it for Tomcat 7, because then it's probably not going to work, and I'm not even sure what version of Tomcat CloudBees is working actually. So we just want a completely generic project using the right version of Java, and click Finish. And now let's go back to CloudBees here and upload a WAR file, and I'll choose File here, and I'll go to C. I saved it in C workspace, and browse down here, and it's where are we, deployment.war, and I'll click Finish. And now it's going to upload that WAR file, which usually doesn't take long unless you've got images and stuff in there. And so let's just wait for a minute, and now, so this page will refresh, and I'm going to go to this URL up here, just right click it and go to Open Link in New Tab, because I want to keep that page. And here's my application running, and the context root is sort of gone missing, but you see it's deployed here, deployment test, which is the name I gave the application, and I assume that's configurable in CloudBees, but I'm not really sure. And I can go to the URLs that I mapped to my web.xml, like login page, I think I called it, or hello world, like this. And those were mapped in the last tutorial, or the tutorial before, in web.xml. And of course, if you buy a URL on from someone that sells domain names, like Yahoo domain name service or something, then you can, with a bit of configuration, you could point your domain name at here, and you can have your own nice URL with your web application running on it. So that's it for this tutorial. And oh yeah, and one thing that I do want to mention, if you compile with the wrong version of Java and then upload it to a different version of Java to what your application server expects, then you'll probably see an error saying something like unsupported or incorrect major minor version, and that means basically you've compiled with the wrong version of Java. But hopefully you won't see that. So that's it for this tutorial, and until next